Well, we are going to get started. So first, I'm going to let everybody know that we are recording and that these events are recorded and put up on YouTube for public viewing. I'd also like to acknowledge that we at the Clay Studio and myself here in my home in Philadelphia are on traditional Lenni Lenape land, and we want to acknowledge the continued presence of the Lenni Lenape in our area and the continued working together for the making sure that we always acknowledge that that is the case. And even in our new building, we will still be in that area. So lots of Clay Studio. Thanks. Okay, so I am going to introduce Ryan. And Ryan is a former resident at the Clay Studio, and we're so grateful that he's joining us today for this Lunch and Learn. We also are grateful for him to have made this amazing work, which my moment of joy was certainly being with that work this week as we installed it. And I'm going to show you all a little bit of an image of a particular thing that'll show you why I was super extra excited about this installation. Okay, Ryan Wilson Kelly combines his sense of humor, artistic skill, and interest in historical ceramics masterfully in this series of heads loosely based on the Toby jug and character mug forms popularized in the UK during the 18th century. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Ryan is currently an assistant professor of ceramics and foundations at Western Washington University. From 2006 to 2011, Ryan was an artist in residence at the Clay Studio. He holds a BFA in ceramics from the Kansas City Art Institute and an MFA in ceramics from the Ohio State University. He was also, for 1 year, the Lormina Salter Fellow at the Baltimore Clayworks. Ryan has taught at a number of institutions, including Ohio State University, Swarthmore College, the Maryland Institute College of Art, Tyler School of Art here in Philly, Rutgers University. The wide variety of materials and communities in which he works has led to his involvement with several puppet theaters and theatrical prop constructions for low-budget films. He also enjoys having facial hair and speaking in the third person. I love that bio. Thank you, Ryan.
Clearly, I wrote that.
It's true, but it just sets everyone up for your wonderful sense of humor. Cool. So welcome. I wanted to start out by asking you a little bit about what led you to decide to become an artist. And I will follow up with the way I often phrase that, which is when and how did you make the brave decision to make your life in art?
Okay. Well, first, again, thank you so much for inviting me back to have this show and to do this event. I really appreciate the hard work that you guys, and you in particular, Jennifer, are putting into this job. And it's been great seeing the Clay Studio flourish, in the time that I've been away from it. And you guys are getting a new building. Okay, I'm on a tangent. Let's see. So I would, for those of you gathered here today, Jennifer did give me that question in advance, and I've been thinking about it. And I think I have to say that it really does start in childhood. My mother is an artist. She's a painter, and from the smallest, my earliest memories, she was kind of modeling what it meant to be a creative person. My dad is also a creative writer, and so our house was filled with not just like people engaging in creative activity, but kind of consuming and appreciating creative output, whether that's music or visual art or literature. And so like from my earliest childhood, I was kind of aware that this was like an identity or an option. And my mom really kind of fostered that in me. And I think I always thought like, this is kind of what I feel best at. I enjoyed academic classes, but I always felt like this is something that I just feel at ease doing, is like making artwork. And I think the big choice was when it came time to go to college. I had been accepted to University of Michigan, which does have an amazing art school. And I think both of my parents saw it as like, well, this is an amazing university as well, so you could get like a really strong education all around. But I also was accepted to the Kansas City Art Institute, which is a very small private art school. And I just like, I was torn. I really wanted to go there. And I think making that decision to go to that smaller, more concentrated school was, you know, a leap of faith for me. I'm really thankful for my parents to have supported me financially through that and for the scholarships I had. But it was, I would say there were compromises in the education that I received. Like, it was very focused in studio. Like, the last time I had a math class was in the 90s. So, as much as I love that school, there was the liberal arts were a little bit thin.
They were very liberal.
Very, very, yes.
That's interesting. So do you feel like, you know, that begs the question, like, did they prepare you to be an artist? Not that we have to go down this path necessarily, but, you know, you get out of school and maybe you needed to figure out how to make a living as an artist still after that, after your education.
Oh yeah, I think that's a problem with a lot of programs, and even the program that I'm teaching in right now is, you know, what I was taught in school, what my colleagues were taught in school is really about the act of making and critiquing and discussing, but not really what you do with those skills. But what I would say is, there, when I was at Kansas City, it felt like for you know, a group of like 18 to 22-year-olds, there was like an elevated level of work ethic and engagement and, you know, snarkiness, but mixed with professional. People took themselves seriously. They took the job of making artwork seriously. And I think a lot of strong friendships were developed in that kind of crucible. And where there were gaps in what we were taught, I found that those friendships have continued beyond undergrad and grad school. And we've, you know, friends we've made opportunities for each other and helped support each other in ways that I don't think that were, you know, instilled in us in any like specific way in school. It just, that camaraderie and sense of community has continued.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's that instigating the work ethic and the value in the friendships, as you're saying, is kind of, those are the soft skills, is that what we're supposed to call them, that really make you a successful human being. And so it does, it gives you the confidence to be a problem solver when you face something like, I don't know how to make but like, how do I decide how much this should cost, or, you know, whether I can afford this studio, etc. You sort of, you have a sense of support that allows you to figure out how to make the decision.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's a great start of the conversation, and I think a good segue into your some of the images that you sent me, so I can share my screen, and then we can talk a little bit about maybe your transition to the clay studio.
Yeah, sure.
There you are. Let's see if I can make this better. There we go.
So, for those of you who don't know me, I work in a range of media, from like small objects to larger, you know, kind of interactive props and costumes, which has led to me doing performances and a few video projects. So like my artistic practice, I would say, is grounded in like making physical things and my love of like making objects. Um, when I was in graduate school, I started working with paper mache so that I could work on a larger scale, and have things be lightweight and I could make them more quickly rather than making giant ceramic things, which are heavy and fragile and take a longer time. And that when I moved to Philly right after grad school to be a resident artist, I was taking the name of the place like really seriously. And I remember having conversations with like the people I was there with, and like, should I be making more ceramic work? And everyone's like, no, you're clearly the like weirdo. Like they brought you in to, because you're like the wild card or something. So I was like, okay, I'm in this new city. I'm gonna be making things that maybe have very little ceramic in them. Um, and so these images were actually photographed in the clay studio while I was a resident there, I think in 2008. And it was part of my solo show as part of my residency. And this is accompanied with a video called Herculean on artistic labor. And I was trying to equate the 12 labors of Hercules with how difficult it was to be a young artist in the Philadelphia art scene. So, in the video, I'm like running around Chinatown with that paper mache boar on my shoulder, at like 6 a.m. in a loincloth. I was under the I-95 like overpass, like beating that Hydra and like cutting its heads off. So it was like I filmed scenes throughout the city.
Epic.
But yeah, those are all paper mache things.
Yeah, and I want to just point out that there's such a strong theme of literary and historical themes throughout your work, that just did you have like a particular love of history class, or can you talk a little bit about why these historical things are so inspirational to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I'll come back to that. Like my parents instilled like a really strong love of literature and of like both of them are English majors. My dad taught English and is a creative writer himself, and collects, signed first editions by authors. So he's like a book guy. I didn't really have, like we said, I didn't really have a good liberal arts education in undergrad. So, I'm kind of like was absorbing things in an ad hoc manner. And I think there is something grounding to me, like in like, where I can like kind of making a callback or a reference to a literary or artistic precedent that I can kind of, jump off of or contrast with, even down to the pieces that are in the show at the Clay Studio right now. They're kind of bouncing off of a existing artistic trope, and in some way, I'm always trying to like make a comment or a comparison in some way. Like in this case, obviously, I'm no Hercules. Like,
Oh, I don't know about that. So that's interesting, a comment or a comparison to sort of draw people's attention to this. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the reason why I'm excited about history is that to me, that thread that we see of commonality between historical things and contemporary, whether it's art or other events or literature, it reminds us that there's this thread of humanity. It reminds us what connects us.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like whether it's history or literature that exists through like art forms that have some sort of long life, when you are connecting with a real event or connecting with a piece of artwork that has this long breadth, you are literally connected to the people who made that or who were engaged with that. You're kind of in rereading history, you're kind of reenacting it, keeping it alive in some way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna resist going down the route of like quoting weird short stories. Or
I mean, please quote away.
Okay, so I think my dad is on here somewhere. You might jump in and correct me here. I think there is a short story by Jorge Luis Borges called The Library of Babel. And it's kind of a magic realist story about a universe that is, it's kind of sci-fi-ish. There's a universe that is an infinite library, and it's populated by the population is librarians, and each of them is looking for a specific book, but they're not all looking for the same book. It's like they're looking for the text that is the right text for them. And some of them are looking for like an infinite circular book, and some of them, it's also an infinite universe with infinite books, so they might find the right book, but it's got typos in it. I don't know, there's something about it where like once they find that right sentence that is meant for them, and it like transcends time and space, then they like achieve nirvana.
I wrote that down and will now read that book. It sounds very compelling. See, we like quoting stories, etc. Thank you. So we'll go into another historical reference.
Yeah, this one's kind of a mix and match combination. This is a performance piece I did at Penn State originally, and I am riffing off of a Joseph Beuys performance where he covered his face in gold and carried a dead rabbit around, and like I think it's called Explaining Pictures to a Dead Hare. I've always felt kind of like mystified or kind of outside of a strong understanding of Joseph Beuys, but as I was doing performance pieces, I was like, well, I need to understand him more. So this was my kind of like joking reference. I kind of borrowed the actions from the Joseph Beuys piece, but inserted my own kind of fascinations. So Teddy Roosevelt here is speaking softly and carrying a big stick to a teddy bear, and the teddy bear being like named after Teddy Roosevelt. And I think I called it Speak Softly and Carry a Big Stick, or Explaining the National Park System to a Teddy Bear.
That's awesome. Plus that facial expression is so Teddy Roosevelt, but also so Ryan Kelly. Like you're laughing and I could just see that crinkly smile face. That's great. And the fact that you're connecting all of these things together. It's like I look at that and of course I think of Teddy Roosevelt and the parks and the teddy bear, but you've added this amazing other layer of art historical context. So it's fascinating. I just realized that we hadn't talked about this really, and I just pulled out this book from my shelf, which is from the 2010 NCECA that was in Philadelphia, and these wonderful installations at different organizations around the city, and the Eastern State Penitentiary. Ryan Kelly.
Maybe you should like unshare this thing and
oh, because you can't see me because I'm small. Okay, hold on. So then we have to go back to your pictures, but if I talk, do I stay in the speaker mode? You guys can see that.
If people go into speaker mode. Yeah, this was at Eastern State Penitentiary, which was like this Quaker influenced solitary confinement prison, and it's all like decrepit now. Saying this for people who aren't in Philly, because I know there's some of my students in there. But I dressed up like Robinson Crusoe and turned it into, with like theatrical flats, like turned it into like a cave to kind of represent one of his dwellings in the novel, and equate that to solitary confinement that was in this prison.
Yeah. Um, I just love the feeling you're talking about books and history and stories, and then I was like, oh, I can just go like this and pull this book out that has pictures of your installation. Yeah, Eastern State is a really amazing place if you're in Philly to visit, and if not, could do a whole 1 hour about the craziness of why they thought solitary confinement was going to cure people of their ills. Not work. Didn't work. They meant well, those Quakers. Okay, so what's our next picture here? How about this one?
Okay, this one, not a whole lot of literary backstory. This is just like a scapegoat performance thing where I was invited to be a visiting artist at a school, then I was disinvited and re-invited, and I felt like there was some bad politics going on. So as part of it, I was supposed to do a performance, and I made the scapegoat head. So I invited everyone there to throw bean bags at me and just like take out their aggression. And, you know, hopefully this was like a kind of cathartic experience for them. And they really got into it. Like they broke, like that paper mache head was like, they broke through it by throwing bean bags at me.
So, that's intense.
Yeah.
But this is the one that yesterday we looked at, and I said, I think you should do, and I think you have in the past, you said, but another collaboration with Nick Lenker is in order. I don't know, made me think of his work. He's got a funny face. Anyway, that's the problem when I can do these talks and see everybody else's facial expressions. How about this? We've got some Ben Franklin. Ryan is the eagle.
Yeah, so this is these are stills from a short video piece that I made. It was I was asked to contribute a piece to a show at George Washington College, not George Washington University, but they it's like somewhere on the eastern shore of Maryland, and the guy curating the show was kind of snarky, and he was like, anything that you can do to kind of take George Washington down a peg, they celebrate him too much here. So I found this quote from John Adams, like he was writing a letter to some colleague of his, and this is an actual quote where he kind of imagines that no one will remember anyone except for Ben Franklin and George Washington, and that they'll think in like future generations, they'll think that the wizard Franklin smote the ground with his electric rod and outsprang General Washington. And I just loved this like fanciful, like alternate history imagined by John Adams. So I made this video where like Ben Franklin is kind of like Dr. Faustus, like conjuring this this, you know, George Washington who emerges as shadow puppets.
Yes, well, and we don't have to go down this path either, but I think there are some people who do believe that that is the case. I'll stop there. And then this one is both the idea of you doing this performance and the fact that somebody in the 18th century was like, this is a good thing to make a ceramic about. So can you tell us the story?
Yeah, so talking about like historic references, this the performance was done at the Fleischer Art Memorial?
For the Wind Challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was inspired by this Lord Byron poem called Mazeppa. And honestly, it's not a great poem, but like I was struck by images that I had seen. Like Byron was a celebrity in his time. And so there's a lot of paintings and lithographs, and even ceramic tchotchke is made to kind of riff off of, or kind of like build off of the celebrity of him and of his poetry. And it tells the story of a young man who is banished from a kingdom and strapped to a horse and sent off into the wilderness. And I loved this Staffordshire flatback where they turned the horse into a zebra for no reason. It's not in the poem. But in my version, I made like I guess that's a life-size horse. I don't hang out with real horses, but
Close.
that's a big rocking horse that I was made out of like plywood and paper mache. So I was rocking on it, and the central metaphor being that I was pretty much going nowhere at the time. I was adjuncting at too many schools and not really advancing in my career. So instead of going somewhere like Mazeppa, I was just kind of rocking back and forth, and being hounded by wolves also. That's supposed to be a wolf.
Well, looks like a wolf. So this is when you were still obviously in Philly because it was a Fleischer, and before you went into your glorious travels to the West, where you are ensconced now. So this is our first little glimpse of something that's in the show, and you can tell us a little bit about Toby jugs. And I'll just also tell people, just Google Toby jug or Toby jug museum, which I did earlier today.
Yeah, there's one in Chicago, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's thousands of them just jammed together on shelves. It's super awesome. Okay, so tell us a little bit about a Toby jug.
Okay, so I mean, I think there were a ton of these types of things like on little knickknack shelves in like my grandparents' houses. And I've always like kind of, they've stayed in my memory as, not things that they would talk about. We'd talk about Andrew Wyeth and we'd talk about, like big name capital A artists, but then the rooms would be filled with these decorative objects that seemed like they were telling really interesting stories, and they kind of stuck in my brain. And so like they're things that I come back to, and I made the piece on the left from memory, really. And I found this image on the right. It's like a real, probably 1950s Royal Dalton, kind of crappy reproduction Toby, or it's not a Toby jug, it's a character mug. The official Toby jugs only depict Tobias Philpott, who is like a fat, grimacing drunkard. But these, I've toggled back and forth between making these large, sculptures and performances, and still wanting to be making objects and finding ways to, stay engaged in multiple kind of exhibition venues. And especially since moving out here, I'm like in the far northwest corner of the country. I'm at like 20 miles from the Canadian border. There's not a huge art scene here, not a lot of galleries and not a lot of spaces to show. And certainly not a lot of places to show like big, weird performances. So scaling down and making smaller pieces that I can send off has been one way that I've kind of found to stay active. And certainly in this pandemic year, it has meant like I need to be inside, I'm not going out, I'm not like venturing out a lot. So it has meant like me kind of scaling down in terms of my studio practice too.
Which, has a lot, again, I'll go back to that idea of problem solving. You're the kind of person who can feel comfortable making these decisions and saying like, well, how do I address making art in a pandemic, and what are the best ways to do that? And I also feel like there's a sense of making smaller things. I know this sounds so prosaic, but shipping, which, we have talked about a lot for this, is, well, or not. I mean, you, by the way, Naima said you packed really well, so you didn't have to worry that anything was broken. But I was talking to some friends who work at big museums, and they were saying even before the pandemic, they were talking about lowering carbon footprint in terms of shipping and trying to find different ways to either get smaller objects or, for them, it's like lenders of things that are closer rather than getting something from overseas. But it is something that in the art world we have to think about, are the environmental impact of like shipping huge amounts of ceramics across the country.
Yeah.
um, is it requires thought, and you have to make sure that it's the right time and the right thing. And if you can make the same impact with a smaller object, then it makes a lot of practical sense, I guess. So then these are really big things, but
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah, sorry.
clay, so they're not really heavy.
I I am a true believer that like scale is a transformative experience as a viewer. And um well, I obviously you were just addressing this and like talking about the power of smaller objects, and I fully believe in that. I also believe in this kind of visceral bodily experience of walking into a space and being confronted by things that are as big or bigger than me, and trying to navigate space in that way. um, this is an installation from I did at Penn State Abington in 2019, I want to say.
In the fall,
um,
yeah.
and I had just come off of a residency at Watershed and drove down to Philly to like combine things that I had shipped and things that I'd made at Watershed. And this is not a performative thing, but you can see there's like references to puppet theater. There's like a like Punch and Judy style like theater with like the crocodile that is frequently seen in those kind of kitschy Victorian era, like, puppet theaters. And I've done a self-portrait as like a hand or sock puppet. And then there's this weird like dream device. It's like a clothes rack that is kind of anthropomorphic. I don't know what it means. I don't think it means anything. It's just like I called it like a dream for drip drying, or a device for drip drying your dreams. And my dreams apparently are covered in enormous tube socks and underpants.
And those are really made of fabric, right? Did you knit those socks?
Yeah, I knitted the socks and I sewed the giant underpants.
That's great. Well, I mean, I don't know what it means either, but they're definitely trying to move away from each other. Those two guys, right? But they can't. They're stuck. There's something in there. Yeah, and you're right. Like walking into that space is a very different experience than having an intimate relationship with that thing that is smaller than you. Even in this image, you can kind of sense what it would feel like to be surrounded by these amazing figures. I don't think I said this out loud, but if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat. And then we're also going to have some time for in-person questions at the end. So this is a different installation, but similar scale.
Yeah, and this is actually combining pieces made for this installation along with some pieces that have been shown before. In these images, this was from a show I had in Seattle just before the pandemic hit. It was in January of 2020, and we took it down I feel like it was up for like 2 months. I think we took it down in late February, right before everything shut down.
Mm.
And I was like, finally, I get to have a show in Seattle. I've been here for 4 years. But I don't know if anyone came. Everyone was sick. We're all dying. But in this installation, I had it's kind of a long, weird space, and I had that same self-portrait of me as a sock puppet kind of facing this riser full of heads. And so the idea is that like these are alternate heads or alternate personalities that I could put on. So kind of like the metaphor of putting a mask on, you kind of take on that character, that I had alternate heads that could kind of fit into that same sock puppet. So These are, I guess, different aspects of my personality. And then of course, since I already had it and the show involved self-portraiture, I brought my self-portrait as a bearskin rug, which is, you know, the hands and the head are paper mache, and then the body is canvas with latched hook hair extensions, because I'm a hairy bear. As a proud member of the gay bear community, I need to represent.
You have done so successfully, sir. That is a great carpet. And I mean, do you want to talk about what it means that you've made yourself as a bearskin rug? Or do you feel walked upon?
At points in my life, I have felt objectified in a way by that community, like within the gay world. When I was younger and I was like, you know, trying to navigate being a young gay person, because I was hairy. I don't want to make too much of this, but like,
You don't know.
Like anyone who has felt objectification, I think, you know, it's kind of a weird, it's really not about you, it's about like kind of a visual thing. And I think because I was hairy, people approached me or felt that they could approach me in a certain way that I was like, what are you talking about? I'm this person. I don't know what I convey to you visually, but
like as if looking a certain way gave them permission to talk to you in a certain way, right?
yeah.
That's a powerful thing to work through and to think about. So I knew there was something in there. It's not just, you don't just every day make yourself as a bearskin rug. It's fabulous. So, and then I also want to note that a lot of the heads are related to the pieces that are in the show, which we'll see in a minute. And they're recurring characters in your lexicon.
Yeah, they're characters that I might have drawn in sketchbooks, or like found images of, you know, Royal Dalton figures, or even like Halloween masks. I love vintage like Halloween decorations. The Denison Paper Manufacturing Company out of Evanston, Illinois. Amazing. Best.
Oh, were they the
Halloween
ones that had those, like just the front half of your face and then like a weird plastic cape that looked like somebody else?
I think that's Ben Cooper. I
Oh,
love those too.
got it.
Those like vacuum formed plastic ones.
Yes.
Um,
That's what I was thinking about, the witch with curls.
yeah. And in a different way, I mean, this is maybe not apparent to people who aren't familiar with my work. All of these heads are actually sculpted initially out of clay, like out of solid clay. And then I take a paper mache shell from that clay, and once it's dry, I cut it off of the clay form and, you know, take it off, and that clay gets recycled. But in a very literal sense, a tactile sense, all of these pieces are like the modeling and sculpting of them is in clay, whether it's the small fired ceramic thing, or in this case, like these large paper mache things.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and you get a sense of how well modeled they are. And I should have thought, like, how would you get that in paper mache? That's amazing. What a wonderful insight into your process. I had a couple of questions, and then we can look at some more pictures. Naima wants to know what you do at the installations when the show comes down.
That is a great question.
The $1 million question.
Right now I have a garage, I have a basement, and I have a small outside studio, and they are all very full. So I was very glad to be shipping off these small ceramic pieces to clear a little bit of space. But I do have a lot of things in storage. And Jennifer and I were talking about this a little bit the other day, but in terms of like installation and performance, a lot of that stuff is made with the support of like grants, or you know, other things that they're not really intended for or shown in commercial spaces. So weren't really made to be sold. And so as a result, I do have a lot of that stuff. And I've also given away or sold a lot of those things. Like I've got people will like tag me in photos from like different cities. I have a friend in Kansas City who I gave a Edgar Allan Poe head to, probably going on 15 years ago. Every week I get tagged in a photo as Edgar Allan Poe. So
That's a lot of, he really likes it if he's making photos
yeah,
of it every week. That's great.
I am surprised that thing has survived. It's gotten a lot of use.
It's nice to be appreciated. So, and then Margarita asked where in Seattle, the gallery, I guess she was wondering.
Yeah, it is kind of an artist-run space in Pioneer Square, and it is called Method Gallery.
Cool, thank you. So these are two of the pieces that are in the show now. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about those specifically or go on to the next one. Yeah.
I mean, I think both, you might look at the mouths and the eyes, they are anxious, and they are made during the first wave of the pandemic. So I was trying to put on a smiling face for my students like a year ago when I was going into my first Zoom classes and not knowing how to talk to students and like put out good vibes. Like, we're all gonna make artwork in our bedrooms.
Yay.
Yay.
Everything's okay. So it's that kind of like scary smile turning into anxious face.
Yeah. So, I mean,
and
could go up to the next image.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'm going to show the picture of them all in the space too in a minute, but just so people can really get a sense of that Toby jug connection.
Yeah, so the one on the left is a genuine Toby mug, probably Staffordshire from the 18th century, maybe early 19th century, I don't know. And the one on the right is one of the many Toby jugs that I've made. And I mean, just getting into like the history of it, I love I love learning, like going down this like weird rabbit hole and learning about the character that this Toby jug is modeled after. There was a poem about a drunkard named Tobias Philpott. And I mean, it's like in a long line of like kind of puzzle mugs and like other things that are like almost drinking games in like part of the British drinking culture or European drinking culture. So I think you're just supposed to like pour beer out of this and pretend that you're like an old lush with gout and you're like, I don't know, rosy cheeks.
Right, because having painful gout was a signal of wealth at that time. It was like a badge of honor in a very strange way. And here's another version. What he's got is I guess it's beer stein and its bottle of ale in his hand there.
Yeah, and I also love, I mean, a lot of them are slip cast or mold made and then painted really crappily.
So yeah, yours is much better.
I just love like the eyebrows they put on these things, like the Staffordshire Spaniels with their eyebrows. Why do they have eyebrows? Dogs don't have eyebrows, but they look hilarious and they're so expressive. Yeah, so I think especially in the vest, you can see I liked that kind of really quick, crappy kind of looping decoration. So I tried to emphasize it on the one that I made.
Yeah. And note the expression, it's sort of like an hour later, I feel like, from this one to that one in his evening. Oh, and this one, another thing that doesn't look like what it's supposed to be.
So this guy's in the show, the one on the right, and I was flipping back through sketchbooks and I had one from like 20 years ago when I was on a trip to the Czech Republic and Germany. And it was either somewhere in the Czech Republic or maybe in Berlin. I made a sketch of this Meissen creature, and in my sketch it was like a hastily made thing in a museum, and me looking back at it 20 years later, I was like, wow, that's a great sketch, I'm gonna like try and sculpt something that looks like that. And I ended up with this thing that's more like a snarling chihuahua. But then I went back and tried to find like what is the original Meissen thing that I must have been sketching, and it turns out apparently it's supposed to be a bear. So that I'm pretty sure this is the thing. It's like the head comes off and it's a jar or a mug.
Hmm.
Doesn't look like a bear to me though.
No, it looks like a dog, a very small dog, actually, not ferocious. But your dog is definitely capturing that anxiousness that we've been talking about. And these are not in the show, but I know you felt you had to, by law, we are talking in Philadelphia, or I am, so you had to talk about Ben Franklin.
Yeah, you're like a block from the Ben Franklin Bridge, right next to Elfreth's Alley, not that far from Ben Franklin's burial
Oh,
place and the
yeah.
Betsy Ross house. Um, I I love Philly. I miss it so much. But one of my fascinations, even before I lived in Philly, has been Ben Franklin and the kind of bicentennial kitsch. Um, my dad's parents, my grandparents on my dad's side, had this. They had a bunch of bicentennial stuff. They including this like really awful pea green wallpaper with like the Liberty Bell and Betsy Ross, like this kitschy horrible wallpaper, but I loved it as a child. And that Ben Franklin has always just seemed like this kind of impossible, kind of irreverent character. He's a scientist, he's a like experimental scientist, he's a philosopher, he's a politician, a diplomat, and he's like a sassy, full of witticisms. And the fact that he wanted the turkey to be our national bird has always, he's kind of turkey-like. And he said that it was like a more democratic fowl. And I just love that, like, the bird can carry a sense of democracy in its being.
Especially a turkey, which is, yeah.
They're weird looking creatures too.
Yeah, they're pretty mean. I mean, not that bald eagles are like kind birds, but it's interesting. I just love that expression on its face and the way you've made the slide. So it looks like he's staring at that and like, yeah, how come you didn't make me the national bird? He looks angry about it. I love that the bicentennial thing had an impact on you. I have a particular affinity to all things bicentennial, having been born in 1976. And I've recently found a cache of these amazing dish towels. They're like printed dish towels, and a lot of them are that weird pea green and like yellow.
Yeah.
It's like I see. I didn't know you had thought about that wallpaper. I would have brought one upstairs with me, but I'll have to show you another time. They're crazy. They're like such crazy imagery, and what was going on in Philadelphia at the time really it did actually have a huge impact on our cultural landscape, because they really went to all the historic sites and the art museum. That's when they put air conditioning into the museum, and they reinstalled the galleries, and all of the historic sites around the city got refurbished. I mean, nobody ended up coming to the festival, and that's another sort of political thing with we won't talk about now, but it was a total flop. But they spent so much money that our cultural resources got like a big renewal. So it was a good moment for us. So this guy is in two of these things are in the show. The one in your left hand and the chicken, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think this is probably the last image in my presentation, but this is I moved studios at the end of last summer. And so like after I had cleared out most of like the furniture and equipment, I was left with like just boxing up, the remaining ceramic objects. And so I was like, I couldn't resist doing some photo shoots. And so this was me with like a bull in a china shop, like trying to cobble together different things. So I wouldn't call this like an official installation or performance. This is just like for fun.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you always have fun, but I like it a lot. All right. So I want everyone, I know we're like already almost at our time, but I just want to make sure everyone sees what the installation and my imperfect photos of the installation. So we'll have better photos, and we are open to the public. So if people are in the area, they can definitely come in and see. And if someone's not around and they want me to walk them around the gallery with my sort of cell phone video, that can be a little bit more interesting. It's a small gallery, and so we've sort of packed it full. And it's also very difficult, I think, to photograph in here. But I love that Brian made his own brackets. So these are based on historical kind of Victorian bracket shelves that were very popular. And before I ask him to talk about them, I will just share everyone. This is my moment of joy that I got to install this yesterday, and then I came home to my house, which looks like this. So I got to feel very at home in the gallery and just excited that someone else likes the same things that I like. So there you go. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you made that decision? And then there's a couple of really good questions that we'll go to in the chat.
Sure. Like the decision about the wall brackets?
Yeah, the brackets. Yep.
I mean, like every fiber of my being wants to like be there and totally transform that space and just fill it with.
And
like,
that's what we first. Yeah, we first started talking about you coming and doing a huge installation, and yeah.
So like this is like me editing down like 12,000%. And I was like, I can't just have these sit on white pedestals. These have to have some sort of contextual element. So the compromise that I came up with, like without having you guys hang backdrops or do, extensive wall vinyls or something, I was like, I'll just make shelves. This makes sense to me because it's a visual cue. It kind of fleshes out the sense of like a decorative object that sits up on a shelf kind of quietly out of the way, but when you look at it, you're like, oh, what's going on with you?
And that comes full circle back to what you said about your family. You're talking about Andrew Wyeth and big deal sort of painters, but you're surrounded by all these amazing objects that have such character and history, and you felt like the energy from those, and that's what it's amazing, and fused your amazing work with all of this character, and brings joy to everyone who looks at it, which is great. Okay, I'm gonna ask you some questions. Let's see. Hallie, I think that's how you say the name. Do you ever actually drink out of your Toby mugs, or are they too heavy when you fill them?
They are, I mean, all of them, I would say, are larger than is practical to drink out of. And they're also sculptures first and functional objects second, if at all. So they would probably pour pretty awkwardly.
But you could, for sure. I think if you really wanted to.
If you really wanted to, you could.
Just don't fill it up, I guess. That's a good question. Sophia says, I love your style. It has a comic look to it. How did you find your style? Did you have any inspirations? Well, the Toby jugs.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, humor is a big part of like a through line in addition to all my other themes, and having a graphic quality. There's a lot of things that like influence like the visual components. I've always loved the kind of mixture of 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional in the same piece, like Akio Takamori's work, where he's really making these kind of subtly sculpted forms and then completing it with a painted line, or Viola Fry's work, John Dubuffet. I could go on and on and on, but I also love looking at like cheap tchotchkes like Halloween decorations, where it's like we were talking about, like a vacuum formed mask that has like graphic eyebrows on it. So I like using those kinds of references to help kind of flesh out a three-dimensional form and kind of accentuate different parts of it.
And did you read Mad Magazine and R. Crumb when you were growing up?
Actually, no.
No? Okay.
I was reading Highlights magazine, okay?
Well, me too, but
I was a good little boy.
got it. So, well, that's, I mean, and that was sort of coming up, in the 80s and, well, 70s and 80s. And there was a bit of that in just popular culture, I think, too. That
Yeah,
sense of like that linear, that like slightly nervous linear quality to things. But yeah. Okay, what's the next question? Raymond says, when I saw your pieces in person at the clay studio, I really admired the finish on the surface. Is your work low fired or question mark?
yeah. Most of the ceramic pieces I make are like low fire white earthenware, like '04 glazes. I don't know. I really love the possibilities at low fire. I love, red earthenware too. But in terms of like trying to get things that are accurate to the references I'm making, using a white earthenware makes sense. Part of me feels like, well, maybe someday I should try and make these out of porcelain, but I hate porcelain. I hate working with porcelain. It's just annoying. And I feel like I have control of this material and I feel confident in the results that I can get. So,
Well, and I think historically too, it makes that, like you just said, it's connected to what this stuff was made for the newly emerging middle class, and it was made to be affordable to them. So it wasn't made in porcelain, and that was, kind of the point. So I
yeah.
think that makes a lot of sense too. Let's see. Janine says brilliant. Raymond asked about the brackets. We talked about that. Lynn Dorman says, I think I have the exact same apron as that you're wearing as the bull in the china shop. That's always fun.
Got it
And
from a restaurant supply company.
that's
It
funny.
was a pandemic purchase.
Pandemic purchase. Hallie says, I love the addition of the wall brackets, really adds to the feel, and I love the chicken and the frog. I know, the frog. Were there ever moments people didn't take your work seriously? If so, how did you overcome that?
I think that still happens. It happens every time I show my work. I think that's okay. I know that there are multiple audiences and there are people that make different types of work. Like I can certainly get behind and feel engaged by work that is different from my own. And I know that's true for people who might make work that is more like somber or more sincere in its mood. So I'm not concerned about that. I don't want to offend people. I don't want to like drive people away, but I understand that my work is not for everyone. And I think that there's enough of an invitation that people could find some enjoyment with it. But, you know, I've felt alienated by a lot of work myself. And it doesn't mean that I am like turned off and think those are bad artists. I just, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Well, that is also just a life lesson and comes with experience. Probably it's easier to have that feeling as you get older and have more experiences. That's how I feel anyway. Thank goodness I've got this gray hair for a reason. Margarita says low fire rocks. Go Margarita. Janine asks, are all your pieces hand built or thrown and altered?
For the vast majority, they are hand built with slabs. There's a few things that, I don't know if there's anything in the pieces we showed, but sometimes I'll like make a a pedestal base or like a small component that's part of that, that uses the wheel. But
oh, I don't have a picture of your big Ben Franklin head that's at the clay studio, but the base of that I think is probably thrown.
yeah, that's wheel thrown.
And then Andre put a Red Groom's image in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And is there a nod to Red Grooms in your paper mache figures?
I love Red Grooms. He is one of the people that I remember in high school when I found him, I was just like, like professional, like jealous, like everything. Like he's like sardonic. He's like kind of like low humor and gaudy, and like the scale of some of his pieces was really impressive. But also he's like in major museums, and like he's in a space where like there's this juxtaposition of kind of low and high. So yeah, I love Red Grooms.
Nice. And then Raymond says he sees a kinship with Mark Burns.
Oh yeah, Uncle Mark. Mark is he's a wonderful curmudgeon. I've loved his work, and I've been fortunate to get to know him a little bit in the last few years. He's invited me to be in a couple of shows, and yeah, Mark is a kind of a hero in a lot of ways, both like the work he's generated and the space he carved out within the craft world, within the fine arts world, to be irreverent, to be openly gay, to portray complicated and nuanced concepts around sexuality, decorative arts, identity. Like he's a hero of mine. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I got a chance to get to know him a little bit when he had a show maybe 3 years ago, and he talked a lot about in the kind of late 70s and early 80s feeling very passionate about making sure his students knew that they had a right to express their true identities in their artwork, which is so important, and at that early moment wasn't happening as much as it is now. So that's important.
I think he was in Philly at that time, and I think that's issues around that had something to do with him leaving Philly.
I've heard that too. Yep.
We don't have to go into that.
Let's leave it at he's a hero. That's good. I agree. And I think you're a hero too. I love your work. I'm so happy to be surrounded by it at the Clay Studio. I am a little sad that we didn't get to do you coming out here and making an installation, but we'll just save that for a future time.
Sounds good. And thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate the work that you've been doing at the Clay Studio, the way that you are supporting not just the residents, but all levels of that institution, in your connections to the museum, bringing residents in and showing work with the museum collection. I don't know. It's great to see what you're doing there, and I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ryan. That means a lot to me and all my colleagues. We're a great team, and as I mentioned, Naima earlier, who's amazing, my colleague in the shop and gallery, and Josie Bockelman and Shannon Jones, and then everybody else at the Clay Studio. Raymond, who's there as well, in my line of vision, and he's doing everything to make the galleries look amazing. So thanks to everybody. Thank you, Ryan. And we will see everybody next week for another version of Lunch and Learn with our some of our small favors artists. So make sure that you tune in for that. Oh, and we actually have a Ryan Kelly small favor from maybe 5 years ago that is now up in the gallery. So if anybody wants to check that out, Ryan didn't know it was there. Should have told you that before. Yeah, it's a sugar shack.
Oh, great.
Oh man. Oh, that is from the archives.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely day.
Thanks,
I'm gonna
Ryan.
put it back
Thank
on gallery.
you.
So
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks,
Great work,
Margarita.
Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a
Bye.
great day. Thank you. Oh, Beth.